Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the ancient text of Nehemiah, specifically chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, to unpack some seriously timeless strategies for overcoming harsh criticism and spiritual attacks. Think about it. Have you ever tried to start something good, maybe a new project, stepping up to serve, or just trying to build something positive in your community, only to get hit with this intense, out-of-nowhere opposition? Well, today, we're looking at a historical text that literally hands us a playbook for understanding and defeating those exact moments of pushback.
We kick things off with what has to be the ultimate disrespect from Tobiah the Ammonite. Get this. He actually tells the builders that their work is so flimsy, so incredibly poorly constructed, that if a little fox just walked on it, it would knock the entire stone wall over. Wow. But this perfectly illustrates the intense psychological warfare Nehemiah and his crew were facing. It wasn't just physical exhaustion they were dealing with. It was a deeply targeted, calculated mental attack designed to make them just throw their hands up and quit.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start by dissecting the anatomy of mockery, then uncover the enemy's specific tactics, check out Nehemiah's rather unconventional response, look what it means to have a mind to work, and finally tie it all into your own daily spiritual battles. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the anatomy of mockery.
Opposition rarely starts at a 10, does it? But man, it builds up fast when you threaten the status quo. Sanballat's anger didn't just appear out of thin air. Looking at the historical context from earlier chapters, it escalated progressively. Point 1, it started with mere displeasure. They were just, annoyed that someone was helping the Israelites. But then it morphed into point 2, throwing around false accusations of rebellion against the king. And finally, boom, point 3, it explodes into furious public mockery right in front of the Samaritan army. It was a completely calculated, theatrical display meant to utterly humiliate the builders in front of a literal military force.
Moving on to section 2, let's break down the enemy's tactics. Now, Sanballat's insults were so sharp precisely because they contained partial truths. Look, historically speaking, yes, the Jews were poor, they were weak, they were former captives. But here's what the enemy does. He takes these partial truths and twists them into overwhelming lies to create absolute despair. For instance, the reality of you are physically weak gets twisted into the lie you are completely inadequate. The fact that the stones are burned and buried in rubbish, that becomes your resources are absolutely useless. And the reality that this project is massive gets manipulated into you will never ever finish. It's a classic tactic, right? Taking a very real vulnerability and blowing it up into a devastating, paralyzing lie. And to really drive this despair home, Sanballat fires off these 5 specific, toxic questions meant to strike right at the heart of the builders' deepest insecurities. What are these feeble Jews doing? By asking if they can finish up in a single day, he's sarcastically highlighting the sheer overwhelming size of the project. By pointing out the burned rubbish, he's reminding them of their utter lack of resources. He wanted to make them question their abilities, their materials, and honestly, the very point of their work. If the builders had internalized these questions, they would have been completely paralyzed. Which brings us to section 3, the unconventional response. So how in the world do you respond to such calculated toxicity when you're already feeling incredibly vulnerable and entirely inadequate? Well, there's a stark contrast here between what we naturally want to do and what Nehemiah actually did. Our natural reaction is usually to fight back, right? We want to argue, we get mad, or we appeal to a higher worldly authority, like asking the king for a legal decree to stop the bullies. But Nehemiah? He pulls a totally unconventional pivot. Despite being this highly organized administrator, he completely ignores the toxic noise. He doesn't even address Sanballat. Instead, he essentially turns his back on the enemy, takes the issue intimately and directly to God in prayer, and hands over all authority for the situation. And just listen to how he prays. "Hear, O our God, for we are despised." He doesn't sugarcoat the pain at all. He admits they're being mocked and humiliated. And then, he boldly asks God to turn the taunts right back on the enemy's own heads. He asks that they be made captives, just as the Israelites had been captives. He fully surrenders his own right to take personal vengeance, trusting the ultimate judgment entirely to God. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that Nehemiah wasn't just venting his personal frustration. He recognized that something much, much bigger was happening. The enemies weren't just insulting him, they were insulting God's people and actively hindering God's work. Because of that, it wasn't really Nehemiah's battle anyway. It was God's battle to fight. By praying, he was basically stepping out of the way and placing the burden of defense and judgment squarely on God's shoulders.
All right, let's head into section 4, a mind to work.
1/2. Let's see how this spiritual pivot translates into incredible, tangible, physical results. Despite a severe lack of resources, despite the extreme mental distress and all that public humiliation, pure focus led the people to connect the entire wall and build it up to half its original height in record time. They didn't spend half their energy building and the other half arguing with their critics. No, they poured 100% of their capacity straight into that wall. As the source text states so powerfully, the people had a mind to work. Think about that. When you completely tune out the toxic noise, stop dividing your mental energy, and pour all your focus into the work right in front of you, the progress you can make is just absolutely astonishing. Those vulnerable gaps in the wall, they were successfully joined together precisely because the people collectively decided to ignore the distractions.
And that leads us to our final section, section 5, your daily spiritual battle. So why does this ancient text about building a stone wall in Jerusalem matter to your everyday life right now? Let's connect the dots here. Have you ever noticed this undeniable pattern in your own life? Right before you go to serve at church, or step up to lead a small group, or maybe pack your bags for a mission trip, you suddenly get into a massive argument with your spouse, or your kids start acting out in unprecedented ways? The source material highlights this clearly. When you start serving, the enemy attacks. It's not a coincidence, folks. It is a predictable pattern of spiritual pushback meant to derail your good work. So here is your playbook for modern spiritual warfare, drawn straight from Nehemiah's experience. Step 1, recognize the attack. You have to see those unexpected arguments and sudden insecurities for what they truly are, targeted distractions. Step 2, pray and hand it to God. Don't fight the distraction on its own terms. Surrender that frustration to God immediately, just like Nehemiah did. And step 3, keep your mind on the work. Fiercely protect your focus on the task God actually gave you. Whatever you do, don't let the noise pull you off your wall. Ultimately, whether you're building a literal wall out of stones, or you're building up your family, your career, or your local church, the only thing that truly matters at the end of the day is your relationship with God. When you seek to please Him above all else, you become completely detached from the opinions and the mockery of critics. The criticism simply loses its power when your only audience is God.
So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder today. When the noise in your life gets overwhelmingly loud, are you going to let the mockery of man stop you, or will you focus entirely on the will of God? Don't let the antagonists of your world pull you away from your purpose. Turn to God, focus your mind, and keep building. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.